This is Everyday Spirituality, a podcast from Connect.Faith, where we talk to people from all walks of life about their everyday spirituality practices at the intersection of creativity, spirituality, and justice. I'm Brian Barden, and today I'm talking with Pastor Debbie Bronkema, one of the leaders of Connect.Faith, who recently published her second book, Midweek Meditations. Thanks for joining us, Debbie.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here talking with you.
On the other side of the microphone today.
Exactly.
So, you've been writing for a long time, I assume back to when you were a kid. What has writing been like for you over your life?
So I started writing as a child. I always wrote stories. I would sit in a tree and make up stories in my head and then write them down. And then when I got to middle school, you were either on the home ec woodshop track or the creative writing and arts track. And I was on the creative writing and arts track, and I had this really awesome teacher who taught us to keep a notebook by the bedside in case an idea comes to you in the night, and really started me seeing life through the eyes of a writer. So that's really where it came from as a child. Then in college, I was an accounting major because I wanted a job when I finished college, and I was going to graduate at a time where there was a big recession, and accountants and computer science people were the only ones getting jobs. But my elective classes were all in writing and creative writing, which was not a normal combination, but a lot of fun.
You graduated and you got your CPA license. What was that time like for you creatively?
It was hard because my job was so intense. I used to 13 weeks of the year. You worked from 8 in the morning till 9 at night, and you only got one meal break for all that time. And so it was hard. I also couldn't read like I used to read because your eyes were too tired. So I used to, in the summer, spend some time during that time trying to get reconnected with writing. And I wrote short stories because that's what I sort of had space for at that point. And did that quite a bit, just for fun during that time.
And then if we fast forward a bit, when you were working as the pastor, as you still are, at Pleasantville Presbyterian Church, you went back to school to earn your doctorate in ministry. Can you tell me a little bit about that process?
Yes, I picked Columbia Seminary because I really liked their program. You went for 2 weeks at a time, twice a year, intensely for those weeks. Beforehand, you had 3 to 4 weeks of reading. Afterwards, you had 3 to 4 weeks of writing. And so that was the program. I really wanted to study more intently and I had some wonderful professors. I had Roger Nishioka, who a lot of people know, and Barbara Brown Taylor. Really great people who sort of sparked that urge again to see Christian spirituality through the eyes of writing. And that's really where I rediscovered that part. One of the Barbara Brown Taylor classes was writing for pastors. And one of the things she did is, okay, we're in class from 9:30 to 12:30. You're sitting somewhere writing from 2 to 4. That's all there is to it. And then you're going to show me what you wrote. And she's the one that talked to me about putting together a project to try to see what writing could be like in a congregational setting.
That was the birth of creative writing as a spiritual practice.
Exactly. That was my final project. And the way that it worked is I started it with a group from Pleasantville Presbyterian Church. I recruited 5 people to promise to do the whole thing so that I would have somebody's responses all the way through. And then it opened it up to the entire congregation. And there were 12 of us who went through the process. It was 5 sessions, 2 weeks apart. So it basically covered the whole fall in the evenings and about an hour and a half on Tuesday nights. And then we had writing to do in between time. It was a lot of fun.
And you've led retreats and programs and keynote seminar style events with that same theme since then. What's interesting to me, having participated in it, is that the way that you lead it, you don't need to self-identify as a writer. It can really be more about the the spiritual practice or the self-reflection. You don't have to come at it from a place of creative writing. I wonder how have people responded to you in terms of, oh, I'm not a writer, or not wanting to own that title,
a piece of their journey. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I say a lot in it is that it's about process and not product. It doesn't really matter what you come out with. It matters how you engage the process of opening yourself up, of letting your truths come out. And what's interesting is your truths can come out sometimes more clearly when you do it through fiction or through poetry, even nonfiction, trying to write your memoir. When you think about a memoir, you're not writing everything that ever happened to you in your life. You're finding the pieces that are important parts of your story, and you're letting that come out and teach you something about who you are. So that's been the most important thing for me to encourage people with, is the sense that it's about process, not product. You may have a product that you love at the end, and you may not, but you might have grown along the way because you've learned who you are and who you are in relationship to God.
It's a very interesting thought about what's the motivation. Is the motivation being in the process? Is the motivation the end product? Your first book that you published was Finding Manna, and I know from other conversations we've had that getting to a point where you had a book ready to be published, that was all about the process for you, and that daily practice of writing, and not about necessarily what the end product was going to look like. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found time for that practice and what that process looked like?
So when I finished my doctoral program, I thought, well, this has been such a blessing in my life. What am I going to do with it now? And then it occurred to me, well, I don't have to stop writing because I'm done with my program. And so I told myself that I would write 250 words a day on a novel and just see where the story took me. And I told myself I had to do it at least 6 days a week. So it became, after I got up in the morning, after I got my kids off to school, before I went into the office, I would sit down and write the 250 words. And I wasn't editing as I was going. I was just looking back for what I had written the day before and then going from there and letting the story kind of unfold without the editor voice that's in your head getting activated. Because no, I'm just writing 250 words right now. I'm not saying these are the best words or the worst words. I'm just going forward with the story. And that was like a year that I did that. And before it came to an end, like I knew, oh, okay, this is where the story ends. And then I went back and read the whole thing, found there were at least 2 books in the one, that I had gone off on a whole tangent. That could be another book. And then I started editing pretty mercilessly and figuring out what wasn't there, what I knew in my head, but I hadn't put on the paper. And that took many months because I am a pretty busy person. So I wrote the edited version, and then my daughter at the time was thinking about being an editor. And so she kept saying, "Mommy, let me read your book. Let me read your book." And I gave it to her finally and said, "Okay, it's ready now for you to, look at." And she did the first 50 pages with red marks and everything everywhere. And then all the red marks stopped. And I'm like, "What happened?" And she's like, "Well, I really got into the story. I didn't care about the punctuation anymore." And then she started saying, "You should try to do something with it." And up until that point, I thought I was just writing it as my practice. But there was something about a relationship with your daughter and wanting to be brave and not say, "No, I'm afraid to do that." That made me, she called that out of me and made me think about, okay, what would it look like if I tried to see if I could publish this? So that's kind of how it happened. Then I also had a lot of really great friends along the way. One is an agent, and she told me what the process was and how to do it. And then I needed to get readers that were people in my life that I was friends with, but not such close friends that they wouldn't tell me the questions they actually had. And so I had a couple of people read and do that for me and say, "Hey, I really like this character, but she disappeared. What happened to her? And, just ask those questions that maybe are hard to ask if you're too close. And that was really, really great, and actually established stronger relationships with the people who were my readers, who are still engaged in my life even more than they were before. So that was a blessing too.
You talked about needing to be brave and to swallow your fear as you switched from process mode and practice mode into figuring out what the final product would look like. Can you talk a little bit about how that process went? Where was the vulnerability there? Where was the the concern? And what do you think back now, looking back on it?
That's interesting. Well, one thing I did was I decided that a lot of the book happens in Florida. All of it, and I used to live in Florida. But then I got passionate about making sure that what I wrote, particularly about some of the organizations I mentioned, was accurate. So I took a research trip and went down, and with a friend of both of ours, went to see some of the places that I'd written about and made sure that what I was saying was recognizable, that it was real for the area. And that was a piece of it, I think, to make sure that I was doing justice to what I was writing. That was part of it. And then also the vulnerability of, I knew this woman who was an agent, but to call her and say, hey, I wrote a book, was just like this really scary feeling. And she was so great about, well, first of all, I want to read it, was the first thing she said. And just made it fun, made it a fun piece. But every piece of that journey. And then the publisher that I had reached out to me because he wanted me to do a book of sermons, because my sermons were online, and he would listen to people's sermons and then invite people. And I checked him out with her, and she said, no, this is a legit person. This is a real thing. And so then I just wrote back and said, I don't have a book of sermons. I do have this novel. And he asked if he could read it.
So your new book is Midweek Meditations, which came from an email that you were sending as the pastor of Pleasantville, with scripture, reflection, questions for the reader, and a prayer. Can you talk a little bit about how putting that email together and then putting the book together, where that fell in your practice and process of as a writer?
Yeah, that has been really fun. Most weeks I look at the lectionary, which is a common breakdown of Bible verses for the week, and I decide which one I'm going to preach on. But in every week there are at least two that are read. And so often I have thoughts about, well, if I were going to preach the other one, what would I preach? So a lot of the time what I did is take the other passage that I wasn't going to preach on, look at it, think about where I felt it was connecting with my life or other people's lives now, and then write about that. And then the reflection questions came out of the reflecting that I did. So it became for me, it was a midweek meditation. Every week I would, usually on Tuesdays or Tuesday mornings or Mondays, I would have looked at that and start writing, and then come up with the questions. And that hour or so that I did that every week was its own devotion for me.
You also write a sermon most weeks, and one of the things I love about your sermons is the way that you incorporate the research and the non-fiction aspects of scripture exegesis, but also the way you incorporate stories and you tell the gospel in a way. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approach differently writing fiction, writing nonfiction, and writing sermons and reflections that sort of have elements of both.
So for sermons, often when I read a scripture, the research and all of that happens first. And then all of a sudden I'll think about, well, when have I seen this be true in my life, in my journey, in someone else's journey that is related to me somehow? And that's where the illustrations and stories come from. It's that question that, okay, the research is done. I know the passage. I've written it over. I know the verbs, all that thing. But where have I seen this happen? How can I give testimony on my own to what I've seen about this scripture coming to life in people's lives? And that's the question that goes into a sermon. Fiction's different. I'm really following characters. I think that's part of what's really fun, is it's a whole different venue for me. I'm looking at it saying, what would this person do next? Who is this person? And pretty soon, as I'm writing, they're telling me their story. So it's sort of an opposite direction.
So if somebody maybe feels as though they're not a writer, but they're interested in picking up a process or a practice, what would be a place to start?
So one thing I would say is there are writing prompts. We have some groups that are helpful to people, and we put writing prompts out at Facebook or emails. And I think that's a good place to start, is with just a little question. The very first place I would start is, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? That being really aware of where you are at the present moment, I think, is the beginning of any kind of spiritual practice. But writing, it's easier because you write it down. And as you ask yourself the question and you write it down, you really become more present to where you are.
So if this is interesting to somebody and they wanted to join one of these creative writing groups, you mentioned it's on Facebook and it's on email, how would they find out more about that?
So there is a Facebook page, which is open to the public, called Creative Writing as a Spiritual Practice. Or you could also reach out to me, and I'm on Facebook as Debbie Bronkema. You could also email through connect.faith. If you look at the connect.faith website, you'll find more information about creative writing as a spiritual practice and how to get connected there too.
And assuming that we can do so safely, are you still leading creative writing groups in person? Is that something you're still interested in doing?
Yeah, I would love to be interested in doing it. We had just had to cancel one that was scheduled for January in Florida, which did not seem like a great place to be having a retreat right now. But yes, I would love to start doing them again. I hope the world will be more back to normal in the fall. And so people can reach out to me about booking that kind of experience too. I have gotten to do everything from 3-day retreats to 1-hour keynotes. And it's been, in all of them, they're experiential. So I almost always get a story from someone about how they grew during that experience.
And if people want to find either Finding Manna or Midweek Meditations, where could they go?
So there's Parsons Porch, which is my publisher, and Amazon has Midweek Meditations. Barnes & Noble has Finding Manna. And if you live locally, the Village Bookstore has Midweek Meditations and can get Finding Manna.
And we'll make sure there are links in the description or the comments and on our website at connect.faith. So I want to thank you for joining us, Debbie. This has been a lot of fun to hear a little bit more about you and your process.
Thank you. Thanks for asking good questions.
Absolutely. And we hope that you'll subscribe and follow us on social media. If you have any questions or you want to find out more about us, you can do so on our website, connect.faith. And we will see you next time.